Karibu, Assalamu alaikum, Afia Taibin, Bonjour, and hello. I welcome you all to our webinar today. My name is Dr. Asma Ali Abu Naib. I am a senior advisor working with Three Stones International and NATO South Hub, and I will be moderating our conversation today. Thank you for joining our dialogue today to discuss small arms and light weapons trafficking in North Africa. NATO Strategic Direction, South Hub, and Three Stones International are hosting today's online webinar. The dialogue aims to identify the illicit arms challenges North Africa faces and what actions NATO can take to support the integration of national and human security concerns across the region. The widespread proliferation of approximately 1 billion illicit small arms and light weapons, SALW, in circulation around the world constitute a grave threat to global safety, security, and stability. Improving small arms and light weapon control through coordinated activities between regional partners and disruption of common SALW trafficking routes are critical measures required to prevent conflicts and mitigate their adverse impact and consolidate peace. During our discussion today, panelists will share their knowledge and insight on issues facing their regions and the overall effect of SALW on political, economic, and cultural stability. 9 panelists have been identified to take part in this dialogue, each with experience and insight on African continent, relevant and diverse individual expertise. Every panelist will be given 5 minutes to share insights surrounding dialogue prompts, and then the NATO representatives will have an opportunity to pose questions to individual panelists. During this time, we welcome audience participation on the sidebar chat, which will be moderated by our team. You may pose questions or insights from your experience in the sidebar chat, and the moderators will bring your comments forward to the panel as appropriate. All comments and interventions from the audience will be saved and included in the final report. Following this, we will close our time together by discussing possible recommendations for how NATO might support stability by contributing to efforts already being made by African countries to respond to SALW, and consider if there is any space for coordinated approaches to SALW on a continental level, considering regional variations. Mary Ann, would you like to talk more about the sidebar and the survey findings?
Thank you, Dr. Asma, and welcome all. I'm Mary Ann Schreiner, based in Kigali, Rwanda, Senior Program Director for Three Stones International. So Dr. Asma has set us up very nicely, and just to let you know, I will be moderating the sidebar chat. So we have quite a few audience members with us today. I think over 20 will discuss some of the conversations that come out of the chat later on in the conversation today. So we'll really focus on the dialogue from our expert panel, and it'll get quite busy on the chat bar, I hope so. And we'll try to moderate and make sure that we get some good conversations going there as well. So we'll bring that in later on in the discussion. But for now, I'll send back to Dr. Asma.
Thank you, Marianne. Now, the mic on the NATO side. So to introduce yourself, please, and to introduce the topic. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Asma and Marianne, for that introduction. My name is Brent Oglesby, and along with my colleagues, Chris Clare, Miriam Andaloro, and Piotr Chrobot. Yeah, my Polish is not very strong. We have the privilege of sitting with this excellent panel that Three Stones has assembled and put together, and we're really excited about it. Our job is simply to sit here and listen and absorb and learn as much as possible from you guys. The NATO South Hub exists in order to garner knowledge, especially from the regional perspective. So from you, from experts, and from people who are living and working in North Africa and in the Sahel, and who are experts on this topic. And then we digest that information and we use it to make policy recommendations for NATO on how NATO can engage or improve its ongoing engagements in the region. So we're very excited to hear from you and look forward to taking the knowledge gained here forward to our bosses and letting them know how NATO can best contribute to the small arms and light weapons trafficking in North Africa and the Sahel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So now we will go to the presentation of our webinar. So all the panelists will answer two main questions, or with sub-questions within the first one, all of them. And then after that, we have a specific question for based on their background to each panelist. So the main questions are: in your area of expertise, what is the situation regarding SALW, including the main issues and challenges surrounding trafficking in North Africa? What policies, programs, or partnerships are disrupting the flow of SALW trafficking, and how? The second question is: what would you recommend for multilateral organizations and NATO to prioritize supporting African government to that issues, such as SALW proliferation can be approached with greater coordination and greater confidence? So we will start with our first speaker, who's Mr. Monsif Kartaz. Forgive me if I didn't pronounce your names well, and feel free to correct your names. He is a specialist in security, peace, and development, notably on conflict transformation, security, sector governance, armed violence reduction, small arms, and light weapons, informal economy, and border communities. So the specific question we have you, Mr. Monsif, is small arms trafficking relationship to transitional organization crime, in addition to the two questions that I already mentioned above. And you have 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I think, well, the last question kind of gets in what I was already thinking to give an answer to, but yeah, I think it's a bit of a very complicated one for 5 minutes or whatever. I think what I wanted to do is perhaps come up from a bit of a different angle, because when we speak of small arms and light weapons in North Africa, it's a bit like the common narrative to see the uprisings that started in Tunisia and caught up over the whole Arab world as kind of, and especially then the situation in Libya and the fall of the Gaddafi regime as being kind of the main or the most important factor for that increase in the illicit flows of small arms and light weapons in the region. I think this is, of course, there is no question that this has been a very impactful and relevant situation, but I think this is kind of shining such a bright light that we don't see what happened actually in the shades, or what happened already a couple of years before, trends that were noticeable. One is that actually in the last decade before the Arab Spring, we already read quite an important uptick in private ownership of firearms in the Arab world and in North Africa. This is paralleled also by a huge increase in defense industries, manufacturers in the Arab world, and with connections, especially with Egypt and Algeria, connections to North Africa. And with that, basically an increase generally of armament in the region that was happening and emerging already before we had the uprisings. The second element is also if we've seen some spillovers from what happened in Libya in the Sahel region. The reality is that we already had important smuggling activities in these regions. For decades, we saw also small arms and light weapons basically moving along conflict lines in the region, and Libya also in that situation played in a certain way its role. Weapons were also spilling into North African countries before, such as Egypt and probably also Algeria and so on. So and even Tunisia. But in far smaller quantities, certainly than today. So I think that is important to understand that against this background. The problem is especially nowadays that we, with all these new badly regulated defense industries that have emerged, and the Libyan conflict, there is simply an important source of diversion. And it's not just, and you can't take anymore the small arms and light weapon issue actually individually. I think alone, if you see the rise of importance of vehicles, and initially we were still talking about pickup trucks, but now it's more and more armored vehicles that are coming into the equation, and they're providing important platforms for small arms and light weapons. And I think this is something that we also have to take into consideration in the world development of the things that are happening. And here, again, the importance of these emerging or new defense industries in the UAE, Jordan, and also in Egypt is, I think, important to be taken into account. Another factor that has played an important role in the diffusion and the circulation of small arms and light weapons is this factor of insecurity that I've been speaking. And this insecurity has been, of course, amplified with the uprisings, but it was already there. And we could already observe among smuggling groups in the Sahel and in the region, an increased availability of weapons, of flows. But now, basically, also with some of the very, now we're in kind of a security dilemma. And so we see a constant increase in the militarization, basically, of these armed groups. And also with that through the increased presence, so that's where transnational organized criminal or terrorist networks are playing a more important role, is that it's increasing that insecurity, and with that the demand for small arms and light weapons is increasing, and where the demand is high, in the end the flows manage to get there. And that has been an important factor, because also smuggling groups are in need of higher protection to conduct their operation. We
have 1 minute left.
Yes,
Sorry.
and so the last element that I wanted to highlight is exactly also one of the problems has been with international assistance in the counterterrorism area, where lots of training of equip has been happening, where lots of emphasis, and it also provided a narrative for a lot of the governments in the region to be actually more keen on having strongful responses on stocking up their weaponry, on being able to negotiate better terms for them to get the weapons, while actually programs in terms of PSSM, so stockpile management and so on, so have been actually not so impactful as one would have hoped. And this is then also an important source for diversion of small arms and light weapons in the region.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was, yeah. Okay, so now our next speaker is Dr. Maggie Beatrix. Again, forgive me for mispronouncing your name, and feel free to correct if I did it wrong. He's an Alternatives to Violence project lead facilitator, and also facilitates trauma consciousness and resilience, and is very experienced in compassionate connections. The two questions we have for you, Dr. Maggie, is how does the availability of illicit small arms increase tensions on community level, and how are these issues addressed in the peace building activities, and the effect of weak or conflict-ridden countries on SALW proliferation in the region?
Thank you, Dr. Asma, and I forgive you for mispronouncing my name.
Thank you.
Okay, my name is Maggie.
Can you correct it, please?
No, it's all right. You pronounced it correctly.
Okay.
My name is Maggie. I'm zooming in from Nigeria, and like Asma said, I'm an alternative to violence lead trainer, and I work predominantly in the Sahel on countering violent extremism at the moment. So what I'm going to be talking about is going to come basically from my experience of working in the Sahel and across issues of the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. So I wanted to share just a slide so that we could use that as a basis for conversation. If you can make me a co-host, please, so that I could share a slide if it's possible. If not, I could just go ahead.
If you can just go ahead and talk about it while we're trying to put it on, that will save us time. Thank you.
That's true. So what I want us to look at, first and foremost, the implication and the challenges we have about issue of small arm and light weapon is very contextual. It's only possible, it becomes a problem when the context permits it. And if we're looking at the context, we're looking at what are the weaknesses in the structures of the institutions, what are the weaknesses in governmental policies, what are the issues of justice and fairness that people are talking about, and why are we looking at it from that perspective? When you see proliferation of small arms and light weapons within any context, most of the time, it is a response to issues around justice, fairness, discrimination, and domination. And that is basically what has done, and that has continually increased tension because over time, people get to realize that when you think they are down and out, the availability of arms gives them a rebirth in strength and consciousness for them to be able to challenge objects of their oppression and pressure. So if we look at it critically, most people that talk about that is because there is always issues around the context that brings about the issue of social challenges and ills in the system that they need to confront. And so if we see it from that perspective, then we should realize there are people who always key into situations because it gives them an opportunity for them to make a headway. So that brings about the issue of merchandising violence and conflict entrepreneurs. And I like what Monsieur Qatar said earlier, the issue of the trafficking and weakness across the Sahel and the Sahara. And we have a lot of that coming in too. And that's why you realize that there is a recurrence violence, sustainability and continuity of arms conflict and insurrections and insurgencies across the borders in the Sahel. And that's why you see that Boko Haram is becoming strong sometimes, because it is easy for them to have access to arms. It is easy for them to get small, arms. It is easy for them to get people that will do arm running because of weak borders. So most of the time when this happens, a lot of people key into the challenges that come within the framework of the system. And one of the things that has made it very easy, especially in our own context, is the availability and the presence of a lot of porous borders. The borders are very porous. So arms trafficking, just like human trafficking, becomes very easy because the institutions and the structures that check those proliferations are not in place, and they don't have the competence and the capability to do tracking. And arms tracking becomes very difficult. Then another thing I have experienced in my space is there are people that
1 minute, Doctor. You have 1 minute left. You have 1 minute left, sorry.
Okay, there are other people that arm those we call conflict entrepreneurs. And arming people is easier than disarming. And so when it comes to disarmament, it becomes very difficult. And so those arms keep changing hands depending on those that want to use it. And that's why you realize that we have a lot of people who run arms rental. And that is part of the whole challenges that we have. So we're looking at weakness of the structure, internal tension amongst the people and communities that makes up the context, and issues of fairness, government discrimination and domination that people are agitating against. All of these are what more proliferation very easy. So I will stop here so that later we could carry on the conversation when it comes to Q&A.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very important point. Thank you so much. The next speaker is Muhammad Al-Nur. He is a humanitarian worker from Sudan with more than 14 years of experience in humanitarian assistance, rapid need assessment, protection, human rights, conflict analysis, humanitarian coordination, program management, early recovery, and population movement. So the two questions we have for you, Mr. Muhammad, is what conditions in the Sudan allow the SALW trafficking routes to remain open and fluid to trafficking? And the second one is Sudan's role connection to SALW trading routes in to and from North Africa. We know Sudan is located in a very critical area that has access to a lot of places. So yeah, go ahead, Mohammed, you have 5 minutes. You are muted. We can't hear you, you are muted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Yo, thanks a lot for having me. And I'm really happy to be with this panel, with this expertise. And as I said before, it's not my area of expertise, but I'm a humanitarian worker on the field. And then I saw the impact of small arms and light weapons on the ground. So for your first question, the situation in Sudan, Sudan has long history of civil war and armed conflicts. So the presence of small arms and light weapons, it is everywhere in Sudan. And also the location of Sudan. Sudan is before the independence or the separation of South Sudan, bordering 8 countries. 5 or 4 have chronic armed conflicts. We have Chad, Central Africa, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Libya as well. And I do agree with Mr. Monsif that the fall down of Gaddafi became one of the factors of this light weapon and small arms proliferation in all the region. So in Sudan, still we have ongoing conflict and civil war. And then we have also, there is no real border between Sudan and Libya. So it is no man area man, I can say. And if we look into livelihoods of people in Sudan and on the regions, they are mainly farmers or pastoralists. And then due to this conflict, more of this livelihood opportunities collapse down. And then many people, they join armed groups or militias for like livelihood opportunity. And right now we have Sudanese mercenaries in Libya joining this conflict with both sides, the Haftar side and then the other strike, the international recognized government there. So the fragile situation in Sudan and the insecurity, many people, even the tribe, themselves. So we do have lack of rule of law institutions, and also we have allows this to fight through. So the whole region, I can say that.
Muhammad, can you
This
repeat the
findings not quite.
Sorry, Muhammad, can you repeat the last point? Your voice was breaking. We didn't get all what you said after the fragile security.
The internet connection is getting up and down.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you hear me well now?
Yes.
Yeah, so what I was trying to say is the fragile security situation is one of the main factors that this small arms and light weapons trading or trafficking is ongoing up to now in Sudan through Chad and Libya. So it's ongoing issue up to now. And then the role, almost the two questions are connected. Mm-hmm. So the government in Sudan, the previous government of al-Bashir from 1989 up to 2019, they tried to control this arm, but at the same time, there were many accusations that they have been involved in arming other groups. Sudan hosted some opposition groups for Chad, and then for from Eritrea, from Ethiopia. So you cannot have it both ways. So the government that announced many times that they are trying to implement disarmament programs, but at the same time, they were involved in arming other groups. So I do believe that there is no political will to implement these projects or this disarmament or DDR programs, I can say. And yeah, sorry, I'm rushing up, so it's only 5 minutes.
Yes, we have 1 minute left, but we will give you 30 minutes because we asked you to repeat a point. It's 30 seconds, I mean, not 30 minutes.
Yeah, so I do believe that the issue of disarmament is really needed in Sudan, in Darfur, and in this region. Because with this phenomenon, there will be no sustainability for any peace process or any peace agreements. And this conflict duration will be increase and increase and increase. I hope. God's
okay. Thank you, Muhammad. Yeah, Sudan conflicts, especially in Darfur, is very complicated, and it has a lot of factors that keep it alive, like even the economic situation where people really are fighting for their livelihood, and for some of them even they like using weapons is part of their livelihood as well. Like they use it to get their livelihood, which is not legal and not right. Okay, so thank you, Muhammad. Next is Shireen Jordi. She is a gender focal point for Middle East and North Africa at GBPAC, which is a network for people building peace. So Shireen will talk about women, peace, and security agenda and the SALW.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asma. Good morning and good evening to everyone. So good to be here to reflect and to give also the perspective of civil society. So it's the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict. I prepared something, but I'm not going to, I feel like it's a very friendly environment. It's very important to talk about the gender perspective in armed conflict and not in armed conflict as well. We have seen lately that gender has been an inherent part of many of the international mechanisms and frameworks. Though we have seen a high percentage of male or men being killed with small arms and light weapon, but still statistics do not show the real impact of the small arms light weapon on the lives of women, not only in conflict areas, but also at home. So the arms and the presence of harm at home is also a thing that plays on the power balance between the gender dynamics in family relations. And this is one of the causes also that we see in disrupting the societies. Given the fact that we acknowledge and we see that when we talk about small arms light weapon, we have to include the gender dimension of it. And this is the social construction of male and female lives. During the conflict, in the post-conflict, just like as now Mohsen was referring to, it's the impact of the resolution, the R2P resolution on Libya, the intervention, and the outcome of this, like the illicit trades within Libya, across Libya, has created a really huge dilemma, not only for the whole society as well, but also for women in terms also of laws. Like what we've seen, for example, in Sudan, women are being attacked by security forces for the dress code. What we have seen in Libya in terms of, as the peace envoy Ghassan Salami said in 2018, that the number of women killed by small arms light weapon because of political or because of being a journalist, like women who are taking the public spaces, has been 31 women being killed by small arms light weapon, 41 were wounded, and this is like a increased number of weapons against women in the public spaces. This is all to say that this year we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. The Women, Peace and Security Agenda entails within it a 4-pillar of protection, prevention, participation, and relief. What is of importance of us in here is that how the Arms Trade Treaty, along with the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, act as a prevention tool in shedding light on how the impact of the gender violence of the usage of small arms, like if we go back to Article 7.4, if we see how women are also utilizing the POA, for example, in some of the reports. But within North Africa, I tried hard to research and to come up with data for this presentation per se about the impact of women on small arms on women. And I found like there are very, very few research that has been done on North Africa, like the states of Libya, Tunisia, Sudan. Most of the countries were the other side of Europe. And this also puts us like in need of much of the kind of research to be able to come up with documents on this. Dr. Asma, shall I?
You have 1 minute. You have 1 minute.
Is it that I have my recommendations now or later?
Oh, later. So you done?
Yeah, so I think for us, like, it's very important to see these documents, try to support the international declarations that has to do with the gender perspective. It's very important to see the role of civil society, to try to enhance the role of civil society with capacity building, especially in terms of knowledge generation about the impact of small arms on women in particular. Thank you.
Yes, the problem. I really appreciate what you said, because the problem with the women and the small arms and insecurity in general, that they are the one who take the sequences of what I mean, the impact of the insecurity, but they are not part of the table, not part of the decision making about what happening in most of the area that have conflicts. And it is like not women issues for a lot of cultures and community. Thank you so much, Shireen. And now we welcome Professor Ammar Mousi, member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, BAM, and member of Executive Bureau and the Arab Renewable Energy Commission, AREC. Welcome, Mr. Ammar.
Hello, good evening. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to join you in this discussion regarding the flow of small arms and light weapons in North Africa. And I'm delighted to address this webinar on behalf of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, PAM. For those who may not know, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean brings together 34 member parliaments from the Euro-Mediterranean and Gulf countries to share legislative practices and engage in constructive inter-parliamentary dialogue on pressing issues, including security and counter-terrorism, as well as regional dialogue on political resolutions of ongoing conflicts and crises. Dear colleagues, the proliferation of small arms and light weapons in North Africa and the Sahel is a serious problem, and it is deeply interconnected to other security challenges, namely regional conflicts and increasing activity by terrorist organizations and armed non-state groups. The instability in Libya greatly compromises the security in the entire MENA region and the Sahel. It is well known that the Libyan state, fall of Gaddafi regime, produced a mass proliferation of small arms and light weapons, many of which ended up in the hands of non-state groups, militias, and terrorist organizations. We saw the impact of this on the conflict in Mali, and we are still witnessing the effect of this proliferation until this day, with dramatic increase of terrorist activity throughout the Sahel, where local conflicts are exploited by global jihadist actors such as ISIL and Al-Qaeda and other local terrorist groups, and are fueled by an abundance of weapons. While the outflow of weapons from Libya was a terrible event for the region, in the recent years, we have witnessed a new dangerous phase in the conflict in Libya, with increased involvement from outside actors, and consequently, a new inflow of arms to the region, as well as increased activity by non-state actors and private military organizations. This has occurred despite a very clear UN arms embargo in Libya, based on Resolution 1970 of the United Security Council of the year 211. Dear colleagues, at PAM, these issues are at the top of our security agenda. Our Assembly has closely followed the evolution of the troubled events in Libya and maintained close working relations with Tobruk, Tripoli, and the UN mission in the country. In recent months, we have been working on supporting the UN-led peace process and the Berlin Initiative. to set up a parallel track of parliamentary diplomacy among Libyan MPs from each part of the country in order to give political momentum to the larger peace dialogue. Moreover, on a regional level, our Assembly has worked to adopt a number of resolutions agreed upon by all our 34 members' parliaments to address the situation in Libya. Most recently this year, PAN, Member of Parliament, adopted a resolution that calls for the full respect of the UN arms embargo, thereby adding pressure on regional governments to fulfill their obligations under international law. From a counter-terrorism perspective, PAN has brought the situation of increased violence and jihadist activity in the Sahel to the attention of our parliaments in this context. PAN has very close relations with the United Nations Security Council, the Counter-Terrorism Committee, and the UN Office of Counter-Terrorism in implementing the provision of UN Security Council resolutions into our national legislations, such as Resolution 2178, 2396 concerning the returning of or relocating the FTFs, 2462 on counter-terrorism financing, and 2482 on addressing the nexus between organized crime and terrorism. At our last plenary session at Atan, PAN Member of Parliaments voted on a resolution that specifically calls for greater accountability for those states which provide safe haven, facilitation of cross-border movement, supply of arms, or any other material support to terrorist groups. Moreover, PAM has worked extensively in the issue of transnational organized crime, and over the year has worked with our member parliaments on the adoption of the relevant international instrument and UN treaties into our national legal frameworks. Harmonized legislation on transnational criminal issues is at the core of ensuring effective international cooperation and remain one of the key contributions of parliaments in the fight against transnational crime. Dear colleagues, let me conclude by saying that PAM view NATO as a key factor in the security of North Africa and the Sahel. And we enjoy the fruitful partnership with NATO, South Hub, and the Three Stones International to engage in this productive dialogue and share knowledge and experience on security issues. I believe that the outcome of today's discussion will serve as a stepping stone for further joint action on issues such as combating trafficking of small arms and light weapons, where NATO's expertise and the PAM platform for interparliamentary cooperation can produce real results in strengthening the security of the Euro-Mediterranean region throughout legislative and political actions. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, policy of, for sure, is very important for the effort to control the illicit arms. Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Dr. Engineer Marianne Amir. She is a member of Egyptian Parliament, a member of the Telecommunications and the Foreign Affairs Committees in the Parliament, member of the International Parliament for Tolerance and Peace, IBTB, chair of Women and Youth Committee in the International Parliament for Tolerance and Peace, vice president of Information System Audit and Control Association, ICACA, board in Egypt. Welcome, Dr. Marianne.
Thank you, Dr. Asma, for the introduction. Enjoyed all the conversations. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank NATO South Hub and Three Stones International for your invitation and an opportunity to contribute to this important discussion on behalf of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, and also in my national capacity as a member of the Egyptian delegation to PAM. My colleague, Honorable Moussi from Algeria, just mentioned a lot of key points from the PAM perspective, such as the need for a political solution to the Libyan crisis, enhanced counter-terrorism measures, and harmonized legislations to stem the flow of small arms and light weapons in our region. Dear colleagues, indeed, the problem is very alarming. As of February 2020, the UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs has reported that almost 1 billion small arms were circulating around the world to terrorists and other non-state actors. This demonstrates that stemming the flow of these weapons is still incredibly difficult for many countries. And as one of our colleagues just mentioned in his speech, it's easier to arm than to disarm. Some of the most common challenges identified by the UN include governmental failure to secure weapons against thefts, the falsifications of export control documents, and the deliberate supply of weapons to different groups and armed forces. I think that effective stemming of illegal weapons flow requires legislations, institutional architecture, broader border controls, export and import control system, stockpile management, marking and tracing, and technology development, and effective criminal justice responses. The role of parliaments is therefore central for achieving a strong legal regime on illicit arms trade and diffusion. Through international parliamentary fora like the PAM, where I belong, Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, parliaments can exchange legislative practices, and this is very important because experiences can be transmitted from a parliament to another, and promote harmonization of legislations according to international standards and in line with the relevant global instruments such as the UN Program for Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons, the International Tracing Instrument, the Arms Trade Treaty, and the Protocol on Firearms supplementing the UN Convention on Transnational Organized Crimes. Dear colleagues, Egypt is one of the countries that has suffered greatly from the problem of smuggling small arms and light weapons, especially in the period following the events of January 25th on 2011, where we started the revolution in Egypt, as the revival of the arms trade is always a feature of transitional phase following revolutions or major political changes, given the insecurity is fertile soil for the spread of arms trade. Some estimates, and this is like very alarming, indicated that the number of unlicensed weapons in Sinai, which is in the northeast of Egypt, increased by, I want you to guess how much percentage was the increase of arms after 2011? It was by 50%, and this is like quite a lot. In addition to the security chaos that accompanied the January events and led to a larger spread of the arms smuggling, there are other factors that improved this problem in Egypt, including the security and political instability in the Middle East and neighboring countries, especially in Libya and Sudan. And during the last 4 years, Egypt has achieved great successes in confronting arms smuggling and adopting a comprehensive vision in combating this problem, which includes the following. First of all, on the security level, the border guard forces exert great efforts to secure the borders and coasts of Egypt on all strategic directions to forcefully confront all attempts aimed at smuggling of small arms and bring them into the state. In this context, the Egyptian border guards have destroyed dozens of tunnels on the border strip in North Sinai. Egypt considers smuggling and terrorism to be two sides of the same coin. Weapons that are smuggled into the country borders are used by terrorist organizations in their operations, and the capital used in arms smuggling is uncontrolled and usually used to finance terrorism. In this context, the Egyptian security forces are conducting intense and continuous security campaigns to eliminate the terrorist hotspots in Sinai and destroy many of the smuggled weapons stores that are used in terrorist operations. Egypt has also managed to import huge military needs, including modern and sophisticated monitoring and surveying devices, which has made a quantum leap in Egypt's ability to fight smuggling gangs and smugglers of all kinds over recent years. In this context, the border guards were provided with the latest devices and equipment in the security sectors, ferries, bridges, and border crossing, including radars, electro-optical systems, and so on. And what is important that at the legislative level, the principal legislation relating to firearms control in Egypt was law number 394 of year 1954. The law prohibits the acquisition without a permit of pistols and shotguns. It also forbids the licensing of firearms in some cases. Furthermore, the law prohibits the manufacture, import, trade, and repair of weapons, firearms, and their ammunition without a license. In 2012, Article 26 of the law was amended to enhance the penalty.
I feel bad cut you off while you saying really very important and interesting information, but we wanted to keep the time for the other panelists, so we'll give you 30 seconds to wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you.
In conclusion, I just want to join my colleague Honorable Moussa in stating that the partnership between the PAM, NATO, and Three Stones International is indeed a good basis to further make progress on security issues, as this exchange of information allows for comprehensive and cooperative regional approach between legislators, military, and civil society to engage in constructive dialogue on pressing challenges, because civil society has also done a great effort the last few years. Thank you for your attentions, and let's keep the conversation going.
Yes, thank you so much. That was really informative. Thank you. And indeed, Egypt has very unique location as one of the very important gates to Africa for good and bad.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. So now Mr. Felix Kuku Aklavon, he is expert in conflict, peace, and security. He's active in several campaigns against the illicit circulation of arms, founding member and former vice president of the West African Network on Peacebuilding. Currently, he is the program director of Center for Research and Studies on Security and Development. I would like to highlight that Mr. Felix will deliver his presentation on French, and we will have translation in English. Okay, welcome, Mr. Felix.
Yeah, welcome. Hello, everybody. Let me deliver my communication in French, so I'll be more precise in what I want to say. Thank you. Il m'a été demandé de partager avec l'audience. Let me know if the translation will be immediately, or I'll finish before.
John, can you tell him how it will work?
Félix, merci beaucoup. Je souhaite peut-être, tu sais, je ne suis pas du domaine, mais si tu peux essayer de faire des points en français et du coup tu t'arrêtes et puis je peux expliquer. On peut aller comme ça.
No, let me go slowly in English. As that will take more than 5-7 minutes. because that will
Also,
take more
network?
time if you want to translate.
Okay,
Okay.
word by word.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, fine.
That's even better. We need to hear more from you. So we
Yeah.
don't want the time to be divided between the translation. Yeah, I think we'll be fine.
Okay.
I think the majority of us are not a native English speaker, and we all have accents. So feel like don't hesitate to talk your mind, and we will figure it out.
On comprend
Yeah,
français
thank you.
ici au hub.
Oui, on parle français.
On parle français ici au hub.
So let me share what we have done or what we are doing up now in our region in ECOWAS regarding the small arm and light weapon. ECOWAS, as you know, had more experience in managing this issue. So more than 5 million of small arms circulate illegally in our sub-region. This weapon majority come from various situations. We can give example of surpluses and old stock of different war. We can give the example of Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and so on. Those countries had their civil war in the past, and Ivory Coast 10 years ago. Also, the weapons occurred during the numerous regimes and military dictatorship regime in West Africa. Some of the weapons stock came from the production, the national production, the local production, and also the diversion of the legally weapon into the black market. This because of the corruption and so on. There's also the incomplete and poorly supported DDR process in Sierra Leone and Liberia. We know that the DDR in these two countries were not succeed. So the weapons are circulating in the region. The interest of the production, the national production, some people, I don't want to name country, but some country encourage people to more work on the national production. Also, you know, the terrorism is not itself developing without small arms trafficking. You can link terrorism, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and small arms. They are going together. And as you know, terrorism is back in West Africa since some years. And also, to all this, we must simply add the lack of political will, both in our states and in the various major international body, because according to the political consideration, some of the Western country can put more arm to some of the government. So ECOWAS faced with this threat, and this can be a threat for the sub-regional peace represented by the circulation of this small arm. To face this situation, the states, the ECOWAS states, decide to go to the Convention on Small Arm and Light Weapon. This convention was signed in June 2006 in Abuja by the majority of the ECOWAS countries. Prior to the convention, we had the moratorium seen in Abuja in 1998. This was a political declaration. The states agreed. The states agreed on this memorandum to for 3 years, renewal years, to not longer import, export, and manufacture small arms and large weapons in the region. So all the 16 countries decided to not export and import arms for 3 years. This memorandum was quickly supplemented by the Core Code of Conduct. They signed this in December 1999 in Lome and supported by the Coordination Program for Security and Development, the program we named Capacities. So this mechanism has created a national body to monitor the issue in each country. We create what you call NATCOM, National Commission, to fight against the proliferation of small arms. And the ECOWAS decided that those commission will be placed under the head of state or under the Prime Minister office. So most of the country established that commission. So the memorandum also initiates a regulation of the flow of weapons entering the sub-region space, creates trust between the various states through a communication between the National Commission. The National Commission used to meet once a year, and there is a network of national commission. For the civil society, the memorandum has been the
just to keep up with time, Mr. Felix, just to keep up with time, you have like 1 minute left.
1 minute?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want just to say that the Convention on Small Arms was the job of civil society organization in West Africa. Mm-hmm. So they draft the convention and send to the ECOWAS Commission. They work on it, and the convention was adopted. So that's to say that civil society have a key role to play on the small arm and light weapon control. Let me jump to the impact of the small arm flow from the north to the south region. The consequences we can see is the terrorism and all kind of traffic along the Sahara, going through some countries like Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon. I think that during the recommendation, I will add more things. Thank you.
And the question, yeah, like there were questions too. You can get the opportunity to add more. Thank you so much. Yeah, indeed, yeah. Civil society is very important.
Sorry for my English.
Your English is perfect. Thank you so much.
Yes, very good. Thank you.
We got it all. Thank you so much, Mr. Felix. And then next is Dr. David Lockhead. I think you will need to correct my pronunciation for your family name. I have tried several scenarios, but that's the best I get. David Lockhead, senior researcher with the Geneva-based Small Arms Survey on IED. He has 15 years of field experience with UN in peacekeeping operations in the Horn of Africa, East Africa, and West Africa in conflict-affected areas. Working on conflict sensitive development, arms control, border security, SSR, DDR, conflict analysis, and joint operation management. Thank you. Go ahead, David.
Thanks very much. Yeah,
Can you say your name?
Yes, David Lochhead. The correct sort of Scottish pronunciation would be Lochhead, as in head of the lake, head of the loch.
That's the one I wanted to use, but I was really hesitant. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak today. I'll obviously try to be as quick as possible, and I'm going to run through a number of themes that relate to the situation as I see it in terms of trafficking mostly from West Africa and throughout the Sahel, actually, based on my experience, as well as some of the research that the Small Arms Survey has conducted over the years, including recent studies on 5-state studies on the trafficking of small arms and ammunition, and my current research on the trafficking of IED components and diversion of commercial explosives, because I think that's an important part of the discussion these days, the effects of IEDs on defense and security actors, peacekeeping operations, and unfortunately increasingly civilians throughout the region. So, of course, legal purchase of weapons by states have an impact further down the line, especially during battlefield capture, and that's something I'll talk about a lot more. But of course, you have some of the historical and current arms embargo violations, including the very widespread ones which are taking place currently in Libya, and including with some high-tech systems, new generations of man-portable air defense systems, and more sophisticated anti-tank weapons. We also, of course, have the post-conflict, the legacy weapons, as people have mentioned, from various conflicts, previous conflicts, Ivory Coast, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Sudan, South Sudan, etc. And some of these are ongoing conflict systems. Also, arms and ammunition, explosives returning with foreign fighters and mercenaries, battlefield capture, which I think is actually one of the most important sources at the moment, from the security and defense forces, regional forces like the G5 Sahel, counterterrorism operations. Also, transfers by states to non-state armed groups as proxies, different types of militia structures, self-defense groups, community self-defense groups, and then onward trafficking of some of those items from, let's say, proxy forces to terrorist groups, both Al-Qaeda and Islamic State affiliated. Diversion of stockpiles, corruption, theft, sales by defense and security forces, either stockpile leakage or battlefield resale. So soldiers that are in the field selling weapons to the local population or to opposition forces or terrorist groups. There are some also losses from bilateral train and equip programs, mentoring programs. We have seen that in various locations. Diversion from peacekeeping operations. There have been many cases of diversion from peacekeeping operations in Africa, across Africa. In the past, it's something that the Small Arms Survey has documented. I would say that the scale of those losses is quite small in comparison to current battlefield losses in the major conflict systems, especially in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger at the moment. Organized large-scale trafficking by organized crime groups, and then ant trafficking. So what we call ant trafficking. So small-scale trafficking of very small quantities of firearms that have been disassembled and stuffed into rice bags, or small quantities of ammunition. But this is a sort of constant and chronic flow into some of these conflict systems, or for use in poaching and in crime. We also see, of course, the use of hunting weapons and commercial shotguns, often linked to community self-defense forces as proxy groups or self-defense groups are created. Often they start out with readily available material and then slowly upgrade based on battlefield capture or assassination, of murder of security forces in order to acquire more sophisticated weapons. We also see the unregulated sale of blank firing weapons and again, commercial shotguns, sporting ammunition. There is a growing industry in Africa and in many countries of ammunition manufacturing. And there's leakage from that or leakage from unregulated sales. Craft weapon production, and then some diversion of legally owned civilian weapons that have been stolen or diverted from legal users. So that's sort of my general overview, and I'll try to answer some of the other follow-on questions as best I can in the short period of time. Best practices from peacekeeping operations in particular. Having spent many years in peacekeeping operations, I would say there aren't as many good practices as there should be. Often the mandates in recent years have been very poor and have been focused primarily on PSSM, so physical security and stockpile management, and not on sort of whole of mission approaches, let's say bridging SSR and DDR programs and UN police and the forces and joint mission analysis centers that are on the ground, and connecting those to panels of experts, for example. So there is guidance from the UN Security Council that there should be information sharing systems on illicit trafficking of arms and ammunition, but there's very little guidance on how to operationalize those. And there are some recent experiments between the mission in Congo, Central African Republic, and South Sudan to share data on illicit transfers. Also, I would say one of the best ways that the trafficking is monitored within peacekeeping operations, or one of the best ways to access data, is to conduct arms and ammunition trafficking analysis or use analysis in relation to human rights violations. Often it's the Human Rights Division which has best access to sites, to killing sites, but often they lack the technical skills to conduct in-house analysis. So by connecting the arms and ammunition analysis to the human rights investigations, it makes those investigations a lot richer. And it also gets you access to sites which you might not if you are working in a mission analysis center, for example. I think lastly, I'll just talk about the diversion of commercial explosives. And the reason I think this is, am I running out of time now?
Yes, if you can do it in 30 seconds, it will be great.
Sure, absolutely. First point, 60% of the fatalities in MINUSMA, which is the deadliest peacekeeping operation, are from IEDs. So it's an overlooked area, and unfortunately, the material is so readily available that there's absolutely no pressure on terrorist groups to even be forced to change the design of their IEDs. They use very low cost, low tech systems for the most part, although there are connections between Libya, the Malian cluster, and the Lake Chad Basin in terms of radio controlled IED use and components trafficking. But by and large, no one has been looking or taking a regional approach to how this material flows into the conflict systems. So because of the poor mandates in peacekeeping operations to monitor the flows, peacekeepers continue to die, and host nation security forces die in large numbers, as do civilians, unfortunately, in spite of the fact that the material is coming from a neighboring state. And often during investigations or seizures of caches, it's quite clear where the material is coming from. So there's a problem with traceability and coordinated action across the ECOWAS region and further afield. So I'll stop there and happy to take any questions further down.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. That was very informative. I believe also like the challenges like these missions are facing to get like a bottom top thoroughly need assessment before they get involved is something that will cause a lot of confusion and sometimes is worsening the conflict in the areas. From my experience, that's what I have seen in some places in Sudan. Thank you so much. So last and not least, Giovanna Maleta is a researcher in the dual use and arms trade control program at SIPRI. Welcome, Giovanna.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me here and allowing me to contribute to this very insightful discussion. My contribution will be focused on a slightly different angle, which is linked to the work that we have done at SIPRI and that we keep doing it on mapping relevant assistance in the field of arms transfers and self-controls. This is something that we have done in the context of assistance delivered in countries in North Africa, but also the Middle East, but also in the context of other regions. To give you a little bit more background on this type of work, it's been since 2015 that CIPRI has built and that keeps managing a freely accessible database, one of the many, if you're familiar with CIPRI work, which collects information on assistance activities that aim to build states' capacity in the field of arms transfer, or more specifically self-controls. And the idea is to provide a platform which is freely available and where stakeholders can check what has been provided in particular regions, what are the donors, what are the type of activities, and so on and so forth. And some of these activities, although not necessarily they're included in the database, also specifically addressed implementation or the universalization of specific arms transfer instruments, either at the global level, like the Arms Trade Treaty, or the regional level. Specifically referring to this region, in 2018, we have decided to expand the regional coverage of the database to Middle East and North Africa. Previously, the database was expanded to cover Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America and the Caribbean, and East Asia and Southeast Asia. So this is the coverage for Middle East and North Africa is actually the last regional expansion that we have done. The reason why we have decided to cover assistance in these countries is quite straightforward, and is probably the reason why we're here today, meaning that this is a region of the world where it is particularly affected from a security perspective from the illicit proliferation of small arms and light weapons. And some of these challenges in security risk have been pretty much discussed already. Just on the top of my head of what we heard today, we heard about diversion, we heard about stockpile leakages, and someone also mentioned the fact that some of these countries, even before the Arab Spring, were in the middle of quite consistent military buildup. But the thing is that to this situation, we also noticed that not so much engagement with international instruments which promote transparency and confidence building in the field of arms transfer have been registered in these countries. From a regional perspective, I have to make clear that what we intend when we talk about Middle East and North Africa, especially North Africa in this case at CIPRI, because the regional coverage in this case we refer to includes Libya, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, while Egypt is considered part of the Middle East. Nevertheless, we have engaged in this data collection, which revealed that most of these countries have been involved in activities which have focused on small arms control, which in a sense reflect what are the security challenges in the region. And the majority of these activities have also involved a specific component of self-controls. In this case, inventory and stockpile management, marking and tracing, and also a relevant number of activities have also focused on diversion. In terms of actors involved, so the donors or the implementers of these assistance activities, the picture is quite varied. In the UN, for example, doesn't have a specific UNODA regional office for these countries, but has provided assistance through other agencies. For example, the UNODC and its global firearms program, but also UNMAS, and specifically in Libya, for example. And a few years ago, we're talking about even before the Arms Trade Treaty, also UNIDIR has done quite some outreach assistance in promoting the treaty while the treaty was being negotiated. An actor that is particularly active is the European Union. The European Union manages and funds 3 different export control assistance programs, and one of them is called the CORM, the CORM Outreach Program, which is a program which directly addresses these neighboring countries, neighbors to Europe, and that aims to promote the sort of principles and best practices in the field of arms export controls that member states gave to themselves. The implementation of this program is carried out by BAFA, which is the German Export Control Authority. Something that we have noted while conducting this data collection is that not a very small percentage of these activities have specifically focused on specific instruments, and that from a type of activities perspective, most of them have been rather framed as outreach and soft efforts, but we also noticed a high number of activities in the field of capacity building in the area that I've indicated before, so mostly self-controls. I don't know if I'm running out of time. Probably I am. I just wanted to say that I can provide the link to the database and the report that we produced on this data collection in the chat function. And if you have more questions on how the database works, how we do data collection, I'm happy to take these questions too.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Giovanna. What a great and diverse presentations. Thank you so much all. And I will not talk more, so we can hear more from you now through the questions from the NATO. So now the NATO have the floor to ask questions for the panelists. We would organize it in the way that if there's a question for the whole panelist, then we can go the same order people are presented to just have it organized and people not talking over each other. And then if they have a specific question for the panelist, then the person can speak immediately. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Asma. Very well done. Keeping everybody under control and under time. We appreciate it. It's a shame, you know, because I know you guys all have a lot to say and a lot to offer, but you know, due to time constraints, it's the best methodology we found after a couple of years of doing this. So thank you for your understanding. I believe Miriam does have a question, so I'll turn it over to her.
Hi everyone, my name is Miriam. I'm originally Lebanese. I think Shireen is too, probably. Yes, okay. So I'm the linguist here, but my cultural background is an asset as well. And I have 2 questions. One, I don't really know who to direct it to, but the other one is to Shireen, and it's about the gender issue. So my question is, you spoke, Shireen, about the effect of the proliferation of the arms on the gender issue. Has there been any gender-based analysis on the opposite effect, on the gender issue having an effect on criminality and then the proliferation of arms?
Yeah, hi, Maryam or Marianne?
Miriam, اسمي ميريام.
ميريام، يا هلا يا هلا.
يا هلا فيك شيرين، من وين؟
أنا من شويفات.
أنا من زيارة. أوكي. جيران.
So طبعا أنا لما أقابل سوداني برضه بتكلم كثير جدا. I just wanted to remind Mariam. I just want to remind Shireen, you have 2 minutes.
Okay.
So a study about the acquisition of weapons by women and its impact on the society. This is the question, right?
No, the question is more, does violence of women and therefore their degradation in society, does it lead to more criminalization and therefore more arming of the society? So the opposite effect. Has there been any study in that regard?
I haven't encountered such a study, but what I would say, maybe in some way, like in a similar way, I would say most of the studies have been on the impact of weapons on the families, the issues of lack of sustainable peace, the inability to have peace with the propagation of small arms light weapon. I haven't encountered such a different discourse.
Okay, thank you. The second question is an issue that has not been mentioned, but that I've read about. It's about the effects of the current coronavirus epidemic, and there are contrasting reports. Some say it's going to lead to more trafficking of weapons, and others say that it might halt this trafficking. Who can answer that question? Nobody.
Or perhaps provide some insight into the topic.
Okay.
Do you want to go around? I believe people.
No, anybody who has an answer or maybe some response can,
Yeah, I am asking the panelists if we can go around for like each one to get an answer for that.
Can I?
Felix?
Yeah, okay. I think this will highlight the traffic because in Africa, most of the borders are closed, but people continue to travel. So they are using the illicit borders. Everything is illicit, is not under control. So for me, the traffic will be highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you.
It'll increase.
It will increase. Okay.
Yeah, because of a lack of capacity.
Yeah.
So I have a question, Dr. Asma. I'll see if I can figure out how to phrase it. I'm not sure it's something. I mean, it kind of gets at a very broad aspect of this, and it highlights that the term what was it? Was it security entrepreneur, conflict entrepreneur was mentioned, and then us on the security side. We have a tendency to focus on one aspect of tackling this problem. And then folks on the DDR side, or civil society or other organizations, they have, they come at it from a different direction. And sometimes, I mean, those are naturally conflicting directions. And so we've talked about, historical reasons why weapons trafficking happens. And then institutional issues, lacking in border control capacity, lacking rule of law. So for an organization like NATO, what we endeavor to get out of this is, where should we fall policy-wise, or how should we think about this in order to generate strategies and policies. So for a security organization, we naturally tend towards, okay, we'll reinforce the country's ability to execute border control, whether that's providing weapons, providing training, or trying to enforce defense institutions. But when we talk about, what was the other, we heard a couple of people talking about lacking political will. So on top of lacking institutions, in some places you might, have corruption and lacking political will. So I'm curious, given that context, that scattered context, I'm curious if a few of you would be interested in commenting on, should we lean more towards, and it might be situationally dependent, one country to another, should we be leaning more towards reinforcing security capacities, which might involve arming, which might involve training, which might involve, techniques that end up causing, putting more assets in the region, or the potential for these assets to be moved around? Or should we take even the security sector, take a more holistic look at limiting weapons writ large, and focus more in that DDR line of thought for the region as a whole? Anyway, I'm sorry, I kind of babbled around a little bit, but I hope what I was wanting to convey came across, and a few of you may be able to share your thoughts.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is complicated, and when you start talking about one point, for sure you will get to others the way you just highlighted everything. So yeah, who would like to talk on this? Okay, David.
Okay.
David, and then Monsef.
And Maggie. Okay.
And Maggie, thank you.
Yeah.
My personal view is that there are a couple of things that are required. One is more on the sort of security coordination and sort of structural coordination between different entities. So just to, you know, a situation like Mali, where you have a peacekeeping operation, 2 European Union training missions, one for the military, one for internal security forces. You have the French Opération Barkhane, you have the Force Conjointe G5 Sahel, you have the upcoming Task Force Takuba, which are NATO members going into central Mali, mostly special operations forces. Then you have bilateral train and equip programs. You have ECOWAS talking about using the standby force. You have the African Union talking about using the standby force to deal with the problem. So you're piling actor upon actor. And one thing that that I think has been missing, and again to go back to the IEDs as an example, what's been missing is a regional approach. So there is no common platform for sharing information or data or intelligence about trafficking of components into these systems. And without that, you have a whole set of disparate, fragmented bits of information and data, which are often, unfortunately, the purview of intelligence entities. And it's very difficult to extract kind of policy lessons from intelligence structures. So that's what our research is trying to stimulate, sort of going back to the ground, doing baseline research with the states in the region, helping them do kind of self-assessment of their level of preparedness to deal with IEDs, but ultimately trying to stimulate a policy response that's coordinated, meaning ultimately ECOWAS and the G5 states with technical partners and support from everybody needs to develop a common platform for sharing information and developing common approaches. And that can be things like regulatory reform. How is ammonium nitrate treated or commercial explosives treated in one country versus another, different jurisdictions, export controls. So that's an example of kind of the SSR coordination type approach. And the other side of it, I think, is a response to the difficulty of putting these kind of monitoring mandates into peacekeeping operations. The panel of experts, if there's an arms embargo, might have a role in monitoring these flows to certain entities. But if there's no arms embargo, it's much more complicated. And even if a peacekeeping operation does have a mandate to monitor flows, which they should clearly in these kinds of contexts, but they often don't, it's very difficult politically for the peacekeeping operations to monitor those flows, especially if the host nation is involved in transferring arms to proxy forces and militias and community self-defense forces. And this is not only in Mali that I'm talking about. This has happened in many contexts where I've worked. So I believe that there's also a need for regional counterproliferation operations, which are light footprint, mentoring, train and equip mentoring operations with host nations to provide technical support along the lines of what Task Force Takuba is doing, but focusing on trafficking of arms, ammunition, and IED components. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Monsef, you can go.
Yeah, I agree with what David said. I think the issue is basically that we have seen now for really the past 10 years and even before. I mean, a lot of investment and efforts have been going into train and equip types of approaches. The number of actors have really mushroomed that are trying to provide something. Everyone wants to kind of plant also its flag and showing that they're doing something in terms of certain responses. But the problem is actually you're trying to build something up on where there is no foundation for it. I mean, the state capacities, the weakness is extreme. And so you're propping up security institutions in a context where actually there is very little accountability. very little capacity from other institutions within society to monitor, to provide oversight of these institutions. And unfortunately, what we see all the time, again and again, is that state security apparatuses are in the middle of actually the problem. They are far more often the problem than they are a solution. I mean, it's a bit exaggerated, of course, the way I'm saying it, but it's not totally in some cases. And this is one of the key problems, is that where we would have more, where money would actually have a lot more impact with far less money than train and equip, because these are extremely expensive programs, but they kind of allow to tick boxes quickly. And other programs, they take longer, and they're more frustrating because the investment goes over a longer time, but actually the amount of money that you're investing is lower, and too little has been done on that side. And what we need is really capacities, be it research, be it civil society, but even be it within the state institutions, the civilian ones, and parliamentarian capacities and so on, to increase transparency when it comes, for example, to issues of arms trade. And to demand accountability from security forces. I think this is fundamental, because as long as we don't have these standards, then nothing is going to push the security forces to themselves improve the quality of their services and so on. And with that, we're kind of basically constantly in this kind of vicious circle, because the forceful responses that we see, and we see that in the Lake Chad region, we see that in North Africa, we see that everywhere, are constantly reproducing again the structural deficits from where radicalization is coming, but also basically undermining the economic takeoff in those regions, and with that, increasing the vulnerability of the people.
Thank you. Thank you, Monse. Okay, Maji, Dr. Maji.
Okay, let me respond, because I mentioned the issue of conflict entrepreneurs. And if we're looking at solutions about what can be done that could make the things better, we have to start looking about institutions that are responsible for legislation, for protection, for security, creating a synergy where they could work together to have a better understanding on how these things are supposed to operate. And obviously, it's going to be a holistic thing. It's not just about militarization. It's not just about peacekeeping. It's not just about having boots on the ground. It's about having policies that carry the voices of dissent together. And when voices of dissent are not carried along, irrespective of what we think we do or what we think we're doing, we're just wasting our time, because it's not possible for us to sweep up all the light arms and the small weapons and light arms that are around. They are already there. They will keep being there, irrespective of what we do about disarmament and thinking about destruction of surpluses. Is still going to be there. So what do? We need to create a web of activities that addresses the social ills that makes people agitated, that makes them carry arms as a means of getting a voice for their pressures. And unless that is being done, there will always be trafficking of arms and gun running across borders to situations, to contexts, to localities where there are problems. So we need to start looking at what are the holistic things that we can do that will integrate both people who are responsible for keeping peace, both people who are responsible for legislation, both people who are responsible for security, both people who are responsible for ensuring that those who are found guilty are punished. So the issue of integrating so that people will not feel like they're being subdued. And then within the structures of the state, what are those structural violences that people experience? What are those things that are happening that is making them become voices of dissent? Unless we have a project that addresses all of this, the issue of sweeping small arms, we will not be successful because people don't give out arms easily. They don't give it up. And it's a very difficult thing for us to trace. We realize that in the Northeast and across the Sahel, at every time you devise a means of getting to realize that this is how arms are being trafficked, because the people who do these things are members of the society. They are a product of the society. They live in the society and they have access to information just like any of us have access. They devise new means. They've used small girls. They've used hijab women. They've used trucks. There is nothing that has not been used. Immediately you identify this, they go to another area because there is always a market. There are always people that need to defend. And the issue of insecurity is on the increase. And with the increase in insecurity, especially in the Northeast and across the Sahel and the Sahara, people will always want to realize that when they are in places that are ungoverned spaces, they need to be responsible for their protection and safety. And that is another thing that makes people go around black markets to get small arms and light weapons. So whatever interventions we're looking at, whatever we're thinking about doing that will make it better, that will reduce the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, must be holistic. That's my own suggestion.
Thank you. Dr. Asma, I don't think we have any more questions here from our panel, so we can go ahead and move on to the next step. You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry. Mary Ann, thank you so much. And thank you for the panelists who answered the questions as well. And Mary Ann, you can go ahead and share what you have from
I'll just,
that part.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Asma, and everyone. This has been really a stimulating conversation and looking forward to more. So I won't take up too much time. I just wanted to bring in a few comments from the chat. And it's been great to have such a diverse audience here, which is fantastic. We have people from the US, Italy, Geneva, Portugal, Egypt, Libya, Togo, Burundi, DRC, Rwanda, Kenya, Ghana, Sudan, South Africa, Sweden, Algeria, Greece, Nigeria, Guinea, Liberia, Zimbabwe. And if I've missed you, please put it in the chat. And you're very welcome. And I've really appreciated the conversations that are going on there. I must say that things that have come up are being discussed now in the conversation and questions as well. I don't think there were any current questions that were unanswered. There was some talk about the bottlenecks and ways to control measures, looking at not only state security, but also bringing in the human security, that angle as well, and factors that facilitate the flow of SALW, looking at unemployment, poverty, utilization of child trafficking and child soldiers, and the impact that conflict has on continued internal displaced populations due to conflicts. And again, of course, the gender inequality and how this factors into the facilitation of the arms. I'm learning a lot. I learned about white arms, which is a new term for me, so I'm glad that that has also been brought out in the chat. And just to let you all know that what is in the chat will also be brought forward in the report. So I hope you don't mind that your comments and your input, we won't name you by name, but they're important information that you're bringing forward as far as different perspectives and information and things that can be correlated with the discussion as well. So from my side, I'm not going to bring anything else forward there. I think it'll be good to come to the recommendations from the panelists, and you've been active in the chat as well, so you'll know what the audience members were bringing forward, and hopefully it can come forward more in the discussion and the recommendations. So thank you for everyone's engagement.
There's no questions on from the audience to the panelists, Mary?
There's been many statements and good discussion as far as what the panelists were talking about, and either I actually don't see a question that that hasn't been answered, so I apologize if I'm missing it.
Okay. No, I
but
just
I think it's
because I was
been
not
more.
because I was not following the chat part. That's why I just want to make sure that if there's any question for the panelists before we move on to the recommendations, just not to miss any question. That's
Thank
why.
you.
Yeah, thank you. So then, now following the same order of the presentation, we will go with the what is the recommendation that you would suggest for the NATO to help with the problem of the illicit SALW. So let's start with Monsif.
I mean, the problem is that there are so many levels, but well, I think everything is about what can we do in order to increase transparency in one way or another, facilitate the gathering of data. So reinforcing also, I think this is something that is also really underestimated. Reinforcing local capacities. So in the countries, for research, for data collection, for supporting also activists that are working in these areas, but that perhaps not always very aware of what would be a good way of kind of contributing, at least in that level. And I think this is one dimension that is important. Another one that is perhaps from a NATO perspective also interesting to look at is we don't have a lot of, I mean, just a very simple thing. When people look at Flight Radar 24 and they look at the map, they see lots and lots, I mean, not with COVID now, but usually they used to see lots and lots of airplanes flying over Europe. And then when you looked at the African map, you were seeing actually very few airplanes on that thing, and areas basically where you would think there is no airplanes. But the problem is that this is a false assumption that every plane that is flying over Africa is actually as a data point on the map. So it's the map that you see with Flight 24 is just a data point. It's not whether there's really an airplane or not there. So what actually the problem is that these data points are not recorded. So it's not that there are no airplanes, it's just that we don't have information about these airplanes. And this is the kind of lack of transparency. So alone investments, capacity building, for example, in civilian aviation management, better cooperation, having an African type of Eurocontrol system, would, for example, in all the domains where arms embargo are relevant and monitoring in arms embargo, would make the work a lot easier, for example. And this is a huge domain where we have far too less information, and this darkness over the skies is a huge problem, because this is also one of the main ways of how weapons are transported throughout the region, not just land.
Thank you. Dr. Maji?
Yeah, my recommendations will be, one, strengthening of borders and strengthening of border patrols. Two, will be addressing issues of dissent, so that governments, regional governments, instead of spending so much time and forming coalition armed forces to have boots on the ground, they should form coalition of nations that respond to the challenges within the context where they operate. And if that happens, we realize that most of the issues that we're having across Sudan, across Egypt, in Algeria, most of those pressures will go down. And the other thing will be a synergy where it opens up a platform for engagement and collaboration, conversation, best practices and information sharing across borders. That is going to be very helpful to help carry things around. And then there should be a platform where joint border activities are being shared. so that people will look at what are the challenges, what are the pluses, what are the things we could do to improve on all the other things. And everyone should see himself as a stakeholder. And with that, if most of those issues are there, it shows that those who are becoming armed carriers because of issues within their context, that will have been dilapidated, that will be depleted. And once that is depleted, it helps us to look at what are the other things that we are going to look for. And I think generally, governments across North Africa should be more responsive to the needs of citizens. And they should look inward for how to ensure that they strengthen the concept of inclusive governance. And irrespective of what we think, I always think about the concept of shared security. Security should be the responsibility of everybody and everyone and every structure within the state. Once we owe to that responsibility, then it will be easy for us to say, yes, we're going to start clearing our systems with the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Thank you.
Thank you. Muhammad Al-Nur. You are muted.
So, thanks a lot. Yeah, it is quite complicated issue, and I think that the recommendations also should be addressing why, in the first place, people need to take arms. So, in case of Sudan, there should be rule of law, establishing rule of law institutions, and then also we need to have integrated approach. Human security should be there, livelihoods, and also the comprehensive peace process. So every armed groups or rebel groups or whatever should be included, because otherwise there will be ongoing conflicts and there will be high demand for small arms and light weapons. In Sudan, for example, we have a traditional mechanism of conflict resolutions, but unfortunately, due to this conflict, so this traditional mechanism has collapsed, and then the people feel that they don't have any body or any groups that represent or defend them, so they start arming themselves. So we need to rebuild these traditional mechanisms, and also there should be like coordination between among the government itself, like Sudanese government, Chadian government, and Libyan government, for example. They need to have some sort of coordination because they are sharing borders and they are having the same problem. So strong coordination mechanisms are needed. So maybe somebody can add more.
Thank you. Shireen, you are next.
Thank you so much. Indeed, Muhammad Al-Nur, I hope that this traditional mechanism can be revived. Regarding NATO, as we all know, like the presence of NATO and the role they played in Libya as per the R2P resolution. According to R2P, we have certain pillars during and after the conflict. In Libya, it's still an ongoing conflict. So one of the recommendations is for NATO to endorse, to support, and to commit to have women at the peace processes, to have women included in the peace processes. And on another level, we have, as part of MENAPAC, which is the MENA regional part of GPAC, we have our partners in Libya who have an initiative in terms of DDR. And DDR is very crucial at this point, and it has to be included within the peace processes. So if we can have some kind of a collaboration and network to support this initiative for our partner in Libya, for DDR, that will be a wonderful coordination and recommendation for NATO in terms of real women participation in terms of 1325 and the ATT, given the fact that Libya is a signature party to the ATT. Second, also regarding the conflict area, I don't think it's it's not a good idea at all to have like the option of increasing arms. On the contrary, we have to work on disarmament. We have to work on how to get rid of these small arms, that light weapons, to increase the culture of peace among communities. So one of the other recommendations to NATO, especially like in their equipment donation programs, that it be conditional for the recipient countries to join the Arms Trade Treaty. And also like to be included as well if countries are violating international humanitarian law or international human rights law, to hold these recipients states accountable by holding any military equipment donations. I wanted also to put forward like to have an expert pool of women where we can engage gender, human rights and development programs, and to have this collection. And maybe here I will also maybe a collaboration maybe between NATO and CIPRI on the kind of collection of data, on disaggregated data, where we can have also gender and sex disaggregated data in relation to the proliferation, possession, use, impact of weapons. Last, also to strengthen and implement ammunition controls in the recognition that they are vitally important as arms control and disarmament measures. So I think in a region that is full of conflict, not only full of conflict, full of ongoing conflict, with the dynamics are increasing by the day, a strategy and a commitment to disarm all factions and to increase at the same time. So it has to be an early warning system, a prevention approach that we have to create an awareness for. And we hopefully like, and one last thing also, like I think also this panel is great. If we can be in contact with each other and try to help each other in terms of raising awareness, data collection and reaching out, that will be also great. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirin. I really feel bad. I see how passionate are you about what you're talking about. And I feel bad like telling you that you should stop in a few seconds, which is very bad. Now, Professor Ammar Moussi. Is Professor Ammar is here? Yes. You are unmuted if you're talking, Professor Ammar. Okay, I don't know if he's here or not, but we can go to the next and then come back to him. Dr. Marianne Amir?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. And I totally agree with my dear colleague, Dr. Shirin, about involving women in the decision making. This is one point. I'll be very brief. The second point is my work in security and securing wireless networks and communications. We learned a lesson. The lesson says you are as weak as the weakest link. So if there is any weak link in any country, then all of us are weak. So this dictates something important, that we need to empower the less powerful countries in order to avoid this weak point. We empower them through two things. The first thing is like through the cooperation with different entities and parliaments, the exchange of legislations might give a power to these countries. Like there are countries that are very advanced in the legislations against those light weapons. So there must be like a database for the legislations that are really there in the countries, and through the international parliaments, Like for myself, I'm with the International Parliament of Tolerance and Peace, beside being with the PAM, the Parliamentary Network. So these are two simple examples of two parliaments that are like spread across the world. So by gathering the legislations and doing this strong database of strong legislations, we can like cooperate with the international entities of parliaments, and these parliaments help to spread the word with the new legislations that need to be there. The third and last point is through the civic society. And the civil society does a lot of work, and I think, again, by empowering and doing some cooperation between the NATO and some civil societies in different countries, this might help to play an educational role with regards to effort to combat the smuggling of small arms and light weapons, to organize cultural programs and seminars, because those programs need to go to the people who are involved, not to the decision makers where they discuss things they already know. But those people who are the victims need to be more aware. So to spread the awareness amongst the citizens of the dangers of the proliferation of small arms and its threat on the lives of civilians, and this will help them to be our soldiers or the soldiers for the world to defend the strong positions. The civil organizations can also study the legislations and submit some amendments, and to take some initiatives to develop national action plans. So we're working on two levels: the level of international parliamentary entities with cooperation of NATO, and the civil societies. Again, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Marianne. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Marianne, I think, oh, okay, sorry. I thought this is our panelist, we missed Ammar Mosi, who put the recommendation, but I mixed two people. Sorry about that. Okay, so next is.
Sorry, you should have mixed between Marianne and Marianne again. There are two Mariannes in the session.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, I saw the recommendation you posted, Marianne, is for Mr. Ammar, but it is not. So, okay, sorry. Sorry about that. I was wondering. So this is now Mr. Felix.
Yeah, thank you. I have few recommendations. First, I think it's important to proceed to a large weapon collection program, like somebody said it before, DDR, integrated DDR in all the region. Also to encourage the creation of the local civil organization to fight against the illicit creation of the arms, and try to network them at the regional level. Also, each state must create a national body to take in consideration only these aspects, small arm and light weapon. The next will be the regulation of the carrying of weapons. In some countries, there are no regulation for that. Also adopt a regional convention for the regulation of the armed trade and trafficking. Because you know that we have ATT, but something is close to the region. I think people belong to that. And also work toward the universalization of the ATT. That also is important. Encourage the states of the region to international cooperation because without cooperation, we can't fight the small arms trafficking. And also transparency proceeds if the making of the legal stock of the weapons and establish a good mechanism of tracing of weapons. Also modernize and computerize the stock management. Some countries continue to register manually the register of the weapons. So it's important to modernize the management. Finally, people used to talk about the borders which are not under control. For me, we can talk many years. Our borders are artificial. We don't have, because you can see border crossing houses. The borders in Africa are artificial. So trying to control the border will be difficult. So we in Togo and Ghana, we talk about citizen border control, because those who are living around the border are the one involved in the traffic. So it's better to implicate them in the border controls, how we call citizen border control. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Felix. Yeah, the border point is really important. It's also a challenge in Sudan. Dr. David.
Thanks. I guess in terms of recommendations to NATO or just reflections on the conversation in general, apart from the things which I mentioned in my previous comments, so regional cooperation, common security strategies and policies, information sharing, that kind of thing, and these sort of light footprint approaches, something that keeps coming up in other comments from Monsef, from Dr. Marianne, from Shireen, are the issues around kind of data and the use of data as an early warning system, combining that with local capacities, supporting local capacities. So I have a project which I'm trying to build now to develop technological solutions to some of these problems for non-expert users, because in terms of documenting weapons and ammunition trafficking, there are, of course, weapons intelligence teams within various militaries or peacekeeping operations, but very seldom do the local law enforcement officials or the people who happen to be at the scene of an incident have the necessary technical background to properly document material, to understand what it means, to understand the relationships between armed groups and criminals or terrorist groups. So there's a need for kind of easy to use technology for non-experts to be able to document and analyze flows of ammunition and weapons. So I have a project that is aiming to develop some of these types of tools, and we're going to be creating an advisory board for that project in cooperation with Unidir and Microsoft. Microsoft is going to be supporting some of the tech development around that, but we want to create quite a broad advisory committee for this project, and eventually to put these types of tools into the hands of law enforcement across the globe, so that we can actually see the interconnectedness and flows of material. So that's the first piece. The second is, I think responding to one of the threads which kept coming up here, especially from Maji, are just that people are rational actors and that arms are political tools and survival tools for many people. So when contemplating interventions, we have to always consider to do no harm in those interventions, whether they're disarmament or DDR processes, and to have a kind of security first lens. We need to, if we're going to be supporting populations. We need to ensure that before we talk about draining weapons out of those systems, that we're putting adequate security in place so that there isn't vulnerability that's generated through our interventions. So I think that's it from my side, and feel free to get in touch if you're interested in discussing the issue of the data platforms further. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The data platform is indeed interesting. I would like to learn more about it. So the last and not least, again, Giovanna.
Thank you. Being the last doesn't leave me so much to say, but I just wanted to add on a link with what I was saying before. So basically the scope of our database is exactly that, to provide a platform where interested stakeholders can have an overview of what type of assistance in this field is being delivered in this and other parts of the world, who are the donors, who are the experts, where a specific area of expertise lies. We talk about the gender impact of armed violence. I can say that we do not collect this type of data, like about the impact of armed violence on gender and so on and so forth. But within our database, we do collect assistance activities which aims to support states or help states to build a risk assessment, an arms transfer risk assessment, which would also take into account the risk of weapons being used for perpetrating acts of gender-based violence. So this is something also that you can sort out in the database. And I think that the database could help stakeholders like NATO to program its own assistance. Actually, we do include some activities implemented by NATO, and your colleagues at the headquarters have been very cooperative in this, providing information on what could be included in this platform. So there is already, to some extent, a cooperation going on here. With the specific case of North Africa, I know that NATO is committed to the implementation of the ATT, has been supportive towards the objectives of the treaty, but I'm not sure that at this stage, based on the type of on the information, the conclusions that we drew from the data collection that we did, that there is a high interest in countries in North Africa to actually engage of being targeted by assistance, which is specifically focused on the Arms Trade Treaty. On the other hand, this does not mean that there's no interest in building stronger systems of export controls, of transfer controls, and therefore assistance, I think, could be more strategic to build and shape assistance around specific needs of these states, and then this could be the leeway, the gate towards a more specific assistance or outreach or activities that could eventually lead to a change in this thinking. Of course, before we mentioned COVID, the impact of COVID. I don't feel like I could speculate on the impact of COVID on illicit trafficking. I mean, I've been seeing commentaries regarding, for example, but not only in North Africa, actually everywhere in the world, people arming themselves, the level of civilian ownership of weapons increasing, and maybe also comments about the shifting focus of governments, which opens more space and more room for organized crime and non-state actors to have a role in there. But I want to focus on international assistance. The fact is that, of course, priorities are shifting, and donors may divert resources from this type of activities, from self-control assistance, which is already underfunded, to be honest, to other priorities. So it's even more important to have a more integrated approach, coordination with the donors, coordination among implementers, in order to maximize the use of already pretty narrow resources. before we also mentioned the fact of what should we do, the issue of training and equipping. This is something that was also being discussed actually at the European level. Member states are discussing the launch of what they call the European Peace Facility or Peace Fund, now I don't remember very well, which is exactly about basically providing extra budgetary funding to allow CSDP mission on the ground, not only in Africa, but also in other parts of the world, to train and equip also security forces of partner states. Of course, there's been some concern from civil society, as you can imagine, from parliamentarians. What can I say in this regard is that this is strictly connected to the integrated and coordinated approach which has been a red thread of this conversation, meaning that these type of activities have to go with hand in hand with assistance in the field of transfer controls, and therefore you have to be sure that there is some sort of safeguard in place, and that this type of assistance linked to the other efforts in that particular country or in that particular region in the field of transfer controls, for example. So that would be my take, and thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So let's check again if Mr. Ammar Musi, are you around?
Hello.
Hello. Good.
Yes.
So can you? Yes. Can you give your recommendations, please, in 2 minutes?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. First of all, I think we have to stick to the United Nations recommendation concerning the flow of weapons to Libya, because I think because I think it's definitely essential to stop flowing arms to Libya, and secondly, I think since we have a platform as the PAM, we can use it to unify the regulations and so on about the flow of small arms and the light weapons in this region. So I think we can cooperate all together to stop this flow, and of course, in this case, we can stop any consequences about this. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping it short. So now, I believe Marianne, you have something to add about the survey, right?
I think we can. We've done really well to keep on time, which I'm impressed with, especially with such a wealth of knowledge in the room and excellent experiences. I think at this point, I'd like to hand over to Nato to ask any final questions or any final comments that you have in regards to the recommendations that we've now heard from the panelists. So I'll hand over to the South Hub. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Dr. Asma, and thank all of you very much. We don't have anything further in regards to questions or comments on the subject, but I'll take the chance to say once again that this type of work is still unique and innovative in the world of defense. So the fact that we're able to sit here and talk with you guys and go through these topics in detail, much broader than just what the security sector would normally delve into and talk about holistic issues, governance deficits, et cetera, lacking institutions. It's what the hub was set up to do, and it's what makes us unique, especially in the fact that we don't just do it with Western academia and think tanks, but that we endeavor to do it as much as possible with those of you living and working in the region that have firsthand cultural perspectives as well. So we really appreciate you all taking the time to join us. And with that, I will pass it over to either Marianne or Jesse or whoever's going to wrap us up here. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And on behalf of Three Stones as well, Jesse, are you connected?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you well.
Oh, great. Oh, great.
People are tired
And
of hearing from me, so it'd be good to hear from you.
Wonderful. Well, it's great to be connected to such a wonderful group of experts, and we really appreciated the panel. Just as a slight introduction, my name is Jesse. I'm CEO and owner of Three Stones International, and we've really enjoyed our time together today. It was especially amazing to have such an insightful and lively dialogue with such expertise and experience in the room. I really hope that it will be possible for the Hub to take this conversation forward to the higher levels of NATO in Brussels. And one of the things I really appreciate about these dialogues is just how impactful and insightful they can be. We do plan on writing up a report based on the discussion today, plus the contributions from the chat, from the audience, as well as the survey that we had open for the last few weeks. So with that information, we'll compile a report, which we'll then present to the Hub. Upon approval from the Hub, we will be able to circulate that to everyone that participated today. I hope that this isn't the last time.
Brent, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to say, and that report will also be made available. I meant to mention that before. It will also be available on our website, the southernhub.org, for everyone to be able to look back to it and use it as a point of reference for the discussion we had today. Sorry, Jesse. Sorry to interrupt you.
No worries. Thanks for mentioning that, Brent. So we'll know where to find the report when it's available. But also, I really hope that this is a start to the ability to continue networking. I saw there was a lot of shared interests and connections and opportunity for perhaps some further engagement amongst our panelists and our as well as the audience. And so at the end of this session, I'll make sure that I share and circulate the email addresses of all the panelists so that there's a chance to remain in contact going forward. This is an ongoing webinar series, and so we will also make sure that everyone is included in our regular mailing list to ensure that if interested, there is still the opportunity to participate in the future. And once again, I'd like to thank you for your time, your effort, and all the knowledge that you're able to share with us today. And look forward to the next engagement. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you so much, Three Stones, and thank you to everyone who's here. It's really, really so nice to see the whole world coming together at the same time and talking about these very important issues that affect all of us. I do know it affects Lebanon, as Shireen knows. So it's so nice to be, I'm the only non-Westerner here. I just thought about that, and I will assure all of you non-Westerners that everyone's listening, everyone's very interested in what we're saying and in our expertise and the regional perspective. So it's very exciting to see all of this come together. And I wanted to tell everyone here that we are on social media, of course. Shireen and Giovanna, we have also a gender section to the Hub that deals with a lot of gender issues around the world. So you can follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. We would love to have you, where you can see a lot of our reports, a lot of our links, and a lot of our visuals as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
شكرا. Thank you, everyone.
شكرا شكرا.
شكرا. إلى اللقاء جميعا.
شكرا كثير لكم.
Bye. Thank you.